and action. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Friday podcast. Okay, that was supposed to play like right when I clicked it in a really cool way, but it's all good. This is episode 19. Thank you for joining me. This beat right here is from my homeboy Joker. I don't even remember his real name because it's been so long and shit, but it's a fire track. What's up with 19? Man, when I was 19, I was wild. What was I doing at 19? 19, I had just graduated high school. I was in college. I was drinking and driving. I'm not proud of this. Do not drink and drive. I was doing drugs. I was promiscuous. I was also a father. Now, that was the first year I became a father. Okay, so I wasn't that promiscuous that year, now that I think about it. That's the year when I was 19, I became a dad. It was 2008. It was a year after I had graduated high school, and it was my first year in community college. I just wanted to see what 19 made me think about. Alright, so inspired by the episode 6 of season 1 of Timeless, which I've been talking about, which is about time travel, history, Illuminati, such. It's about Watergate. And if you don't know Watergate, basically Watergate was not a conspiracy. It was a scandal about Richard Nixon, where he had his party spy on the DNC, and they got caught. And that's kind of interesting because I don't, it's just when you put it in context today. So, in Timeless, as I've discussed before, there's a bad guy family, and throughout history, they've made decisions that led to their superior power, which led them to be intertwined with American history, government. So in the show, they call them Rittenhouse, Ritten House. What's interesting about that name, coincidence, I never hear that name besides on this show. Okay, but this kid that was on the news recently that shot a protester, quote unquote, his last name was Rittenhouse. Coincidence. Let's see. So Rittenhouse threatens Rufus, who's he's the black guy on the show. Not the black guy on the show, but he's one of the main characters, and he's the one who's the pilot. And so Rittenhouse threatens Rufus's family. They also ask him not to say Rittenhouse aloud. They threaten his nephew because they want him to spy. Now, last time we talked about, I think I get into it this time, but Connor Mason is the main owner of Mason Technology. He's the one who created the time machine. Rittenhouse funded that secretly. Then this good guy, who is portrayed as a bad guy, steals one of the time machines from Connor Mason Incorporated, which is funded by Rittenhouse, and so they gotta get the U.S. government involved to help go after them. So they have to go back to 1972, June 20th. Summer of 72 was an interesting time. Hippies, Black Power movements. If you watch Forrest Gump, it kind of goes into it. You know what I'm saying? what it's worth, that movie shows historical aspects, sort of. So they traced the other time machine with the bad guy to June 20th, 72. At that time, Nixon, I think he had already resigned. And they talk about how there was an 18.5-minute gap in the Watergate tape, which was erased by his secretary. So this was a big scandal because he handed over the tape because it's illegal to spy on another party. And he had to hand over the tapes. And when he did, they realized, yo, this cat, Richard Dick Nixon, because Dick is the nickname for Richard. They deleted fucking, that's a whole podcast. 18.5 minutes? That's an episode. I mean, if you add an episode of fucking The Simpsons, you know, if you take away all the commercials and shit, it's more like 22 minutes, but man. So, sorry, I'm about to sneeze, I believe. No. So the Rittenhouse agent that went and talked to Rufus, who also was the one who shut down Rufus's smart car, to threaten him before he threatened Rufus's family. His name was Benjamin Cahill. And that happens to be one of the other main characters' father. She doesn't know it yet, but she was born in Rittenhouse, just like people are born into the Rothschilds. And that's the synonym. Rittenhouse in Timeless is Rothschild in real life. That's ROTSCHILD. Rothschild. I mean, they're up there with the Rockefellers. And I'm not talking about Jay-Z's record label. The DuPonts are up there. There's like 13 families. You can get into that if you want to look into that. But yeah. So it's the same guy who threatens Rufus, and that's Lucy, the historian's dad. Okay. Now, Garcia Flynn is the guy who they think is the bad guy, but he's just trying to change history to get rid of Rittenhouse, which is actually Rothschild, which is actually the Illuminati. So Garcia Flynn takes Rufus, Lucy, and I forgot the name of the soldier that's with him, right? Because there's three of them that go on a time machine and go after Garcia Flynn. It's a historian, it's the pilot, and it's the soldier. And they took them, Garcia Flynn and his minions, took them to the same hotel that she stayed in 100 years prior in 1872, which was a couple episodes ago, where they had it was about the Civil War, it's about Abraham Lincoln. It's a couple episodes ago, so you can go back and check that out. And I talk about, Lincoln's War and stuff. So yeah, it was 1872, so 100 years later, 1972. That's interesting. Because in 1872, that's when Lincoln dies. He's assassinated. In 1972, Nixon resigns. So, alright, so Garcia Flynn gets a hold of the actual full tape in this show. So this is fiction, but you know, it mixes historical with fiction, right? It's great. It's on Hulu. Timeless. Flynn plays the Nixon tape. All right, and so you hear somebody who does a very good Nixon accent say, "This doc," I can't do a good Nixon, but I'm gonna try. "This doc, if Rittenhouse plays by different rules, do you understand how deep I am with them? They'll take my presidency, my wife, my daughter. I am not a criminal." They didn't put that part, but so he's afraid of Rittenhouse. They're gonna take his presidency. They're gonna take his wife and his daughter. All right. If you've done any research into the cabal or Illuminati or secret government type shit, any conspiracy theories. The people who took out Kennedy, the people who took out Malcolm X, the people who took out Martin Luther King Jr. They're pretty much connected, as many people have put together in this day and age. So this is just showing us that Nixon did something, which I think spying on the DNC and getting caught, which pissed off Rittenhouse. But we talk about in a second, not in a second, but pretty soon, after we talk about the Black Liberation Army, we're going to talk about some facts about Watergate and Nixon. But before we get to that, let us continue about the show Timeless, and we will get to the BLA soon. These are all great topics. I love all this information that I learned, so I can't wait to just, express it. So in the show, the doc, because he says this doc, if Rittenhouse, I guess if they get the doc, or if she gets away. So anyway, the doc ends up being a young black woman who was born into Rittenhouse, but she was on the run being helped by the Black Liberation Army. So they call her the doc, like a document, but she's a doctor. She has a PhD from Chicago, in the University of Chicago. And she knows, she has memorized every single member of Rittenhouse. They don't have anything written, according to this person. So so Garcia Flynn wants Lucy and Rufus to find the doc, which they don't know. They assume it's a piece of paper first. Everybody assumes it's a piece of paper because Rittenhouse talked to Rufus and told Rufus before he went to 1972 that he needs to call a certain number when he found the doc, and they told him to destroy the doc. When he called the number, and when he called that number, it ended up being Mr. fucking Cahill, Benjamin Cahill, Lucy's dad, in 1972. Okay, so hopefully I didn't lose you, but basically there's a good guy she was born into a bad family, which is basically Illuminati, but she doesn't want to be in it. She has a husband and a baby who are in Hong Kong. She's trying to get there, but for now, the Black Liberation Army is protecting her from Rittenhouse, which is basically the Rothschilds, which is basically the Illuminati. All right. So Lucy and Rufus meet with the associate director of the FBI at the time, whose name is Mark Felt, who was he was the head of the Deep Throat operation, which tips the media off to Watergate. So this is a real journalist, Mark Felt, that was the reason that Nixon got caught up. This leads Rufus and Lucy to the Black Liberation Army, which we will get back to pretty soon. And that's because the guy tells him, he's like, I don't know where she went, or something like the people who gave me information, but it's a signal of a fist with horns. And so Rufus drew a picture, and it was a fist with two spikes. And he's like, okay, I know what that is. And apparently when he was in college, he tells Lucy that when he was in college, he was digging this chick who was really into the Black Panther Party and stuff like that. So he learned about it for her, which ended up helping, But that's fact from a fictional character named Rufus learning about the facts of the BLA. Not the BLM, but the BLA, which was in the 60s to the 81. Garcia Flynn explains on this episode to the soldier, the NSA outsourced surveillance. Here's his accent. Off the books to a group. Flynn worked with, because I thought I was writing the whole quote. So the NSA outsourced surveillance off the books, which means illegally, to a group that Garcia Flynn, the bad guy, worked for. And what he would do was evade security, retrieve, and review some corporate financials. He's like an accountant, but I don't know. So Flynn said that he stumbled upon huge sums of money being funneled through the Cayman Islands to a world-renowned tech mogul, Connor Mason. I compare Connor Mason to, he's like an Elon Musk type, to help him achieve his latest ambition, time travel. Hard to tell where the money was coming from. This is Garcia Flynn telling the soldier. But once I broke the encryption, one name kept popping up. Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse bankrolls Connor Mason. And so I wrote a note. What if Rothschilds bankrolled Musk or Gates? Bill Gates. A lot of times they put stuff in shows and movies. A lot of it's fake. Sometimes it's like they get inspiration from shit that actually goes on. Sometimes it's predictive programming. Sometimes it's a hint to help us understand. So let's see. So Rufus goes to the BLA, the Black Liberation Army, which was led by Gregory Hayes and Eldridge Cleaver. The doc is a black woman with a PhD in history. A melanated woman from the University of Chicago. She was staying at Watergate till Rittenhouse broke in after her because she left. She was born into it. Most are, going back generations. So according to Timeless, she was staying at Watergate, but she was running away from Rittenhouse. And I guess it was under the watch of Nixon. It was in DC. And interesting. So the doc, or Flynn, says America and Rittenhouse are so intertwined, sometimes it's hard to tell one from another. And to me that translates as America and Illuminati, or the Rothschilds, or the Cabal, or the 13 Families, or the Vatican, or the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, and so on and so forth. It's so intertwined with America, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. But there is a difference. Once the doc's son was born, she sent her husband and son to Hong Kong. At the end of the episode, the doc gets away. The Black Liberation Army helps her. Flynn is present day, visits his wife and daughter's graves. Their names on the show, alright, so I talked about this last time, but just to recap real quick about this character, Garcia Flynn, he's going after Rittenhouse through the periods of history to try to erase them, because since he worked for the NSA and asked about Rittenhouse, they killed which I thought I wrote this down, they killed his wife and daughter. And he barely got away. It was too many people to fight back. And so what he's trying to do is keep doing these things. So he tried to assassinate the other people, Ulysses S. Grant, the other people who were conspired against along with Lincoln. He also went to the Alamo to try to stop the United States from helping Texas. He was just doing anything he can to weaken the Rittenhouse family, right? And I think it's like towards the last episode, they end up in like 1776. But that's for future time. So his daughter's name was Iris Flynn, and the Iris, if I'm not mistaken, is the eye. And the time machine looks like an eye because it was made by the Illuminati, which uses that eye. But sometimes the eye's not bad, A lot of times, dark forces take good things and try to turn them dark. Like, for instance, the swastika was a symbol of peace, and then the Nazis reversed it and made it a symbol of hate. So, let's take a quick break, and then I'm going to get to the Black Liberation Army. Going to space, getting a taste of the atmosphere. I'm getting out of here. I got no fucking fear. I got the cap on, no cap. Never going back to the past, to the future. I blast, don't mean to shoot you. When I spit these rhymes, these hot bars, I'm up in the stars. Man, what's up? Alright. Excuse me. It's that late hitter from the fucking bowl, that choke. Yeah. Alright. So check it. The Black Liberation Army, 1960 to 1981. Composed entirely of Black Panthers. Man, shout out to Chadwick Boseman. Black Panther. Great movie. Inspired my son and myself. And it's very sad that he passed away at such a young age. Composed entirely of Black Panthers who served as members of both groups, and the organization's program was one of war against the U.S. government, and its stated goal was to take up arms for the liberation and self-determination of Black people in the U.S. Okay, excuse me. All right. I'm gonna read that again because I read it like it was gonna keep going, but it ends. So supposedly, this is from Wikipedia, so take that as you may. But actually, I'm just gonna keep going because that didn't really make. But it was just basically for the liberation and self-determination of Black people in the U.S. and use guns if necessary. Supposedly carried out a series of bombings, killings of police officers and drug dealers, robberies, which members termed as expropriations, and prison breaks. Now, as you know, a lot of these things were probably justified. But, yeah, let's continue. So in 1970, by 1970, police and FBI sabotage. See Cointelpro, which was an operation, which will be coming up soon. But the FBI sabotage, infiltration, sectarianism, the lengthy prison sentences, and death of key members, including Fred Hampton, had significantly undermined the party. Elridge Cleaver started the party after he was expelled from the Black Panther Party for criticizing them for being reformists rather than revolutionaries. Geronimo Pratt asserted that the BLA was a movement concept that predated the BPP. And these are some of the BLA principles. It was anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist, and anti-sexist. Number 2, it strived to abolish these symptoms and the institution of a system where Black people have total. So it strived to abolish these systems: the anti-capitalist, the anti-imperial, the imperialism, the racism, the sexism, the capitalism. It would abolish those systems and institute and put in a system where Black people have total and absolute control over their own destiny as a people. Nothing wrong with that, man. Number 3, that in order to abolish one system of oppression, we must utilize the science of struggle, develop the science as it relates to our unique national condition. That's heavy. That's probably gonna hit me later on. All right, so Cointelpro, which was the operation that the FBI did to infiltrate not just the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army, but many such organizations, was called Cointelpro because it stood for Counterintelligence Program. And that program was from 1956 officially to 1979 and beyond. So it's, that's from Wikipedia. It went beyond 1979, so who knows? It doesn't say it ended. It was a series of covert and illegal projects conducted by the U.S. FBI aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting American political organizations. FBI records show that Cointelpro resources targeted groups and individuals the FBI deemed subversive, including feminist organizations, the Communist Party USA, anti-Vietnam War organizers, the KKK. Well, you know, that's pretty good to infiltrate and destroy. But did they though? Activists of the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power Movement, i.e. Martin Luther King Jr., the Nation of Islam, and the BPP, environmentalists and animal rights organizations, the American Indian Movement, independence movements such as Puerto Rican independence groups like the Young Lords, and a variety of organizations that were part of the broader New Left. Okay. So I think what happened was that the FBI infiltrated some good organizations and some bad organizations, and they used the bad organizations to do their bidding, and they got into the good organizations to destroy them. So let's say they used the KKK to exert their power, but they infiltrated the Civil Rights Movement to simmer it down because it was getting too fired up. There was a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. before he died about going to Washington, D.C. and demanding a check for the money that was owed, that is owed. And I understand that, you know, it's a unique history of our melanated brothers and sisters in the United States of America, in the world. You know, and I do believe that more melanated people are probably closer to God and the Creator, because supposedly the pineal glands are bigger, and when non-calcified, they're you know, like, I don't know. So it's interesting that there's been such a history of oppression, you know, even though that oppression has always been dismantled. Like, you know, like achievements from minorities, it can't be stopped. You know, because it's not us, it's through the universe, and that's the universe knows that inside, you know, most people are the same. So let's see. So John F. Kennedy allowed a trial basis of a month or so on spying on Martin Luther King Jr., but when John F. Kennedy died, Hoover gave zero limits. So the President Hoover said, go all out. That's when they started really fucking with Martin Luther King Jr. and started trying to get him on tape having sex. They tried to do anything that they started trying to get him to commit suicide. Hoover was, I think Edgar J. Hoover was the leader of the FBI. Yeah, he's a piece of shit. Was and is. Let's take one more break before we get to the... I got two more things to do. Because we do got to talk about the crystal of the week, but that'll be pretty fast, y'all. Okay, so this book, I talked about it last time and probably before that. It's by Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States. I highly recommend it. This particular chapter is chapter 20, the 70s, Under Control. And this is just a couple of excerpts, okay? This is not, I'm not gonna read to y'all. You know what I'm saying? But I thought this shit was pretty fucking interesting. That way, you know, if you can't afford this book right now, or maybe this will convince you to get, because this is just like, I'm just literally just a little tiny excerpt. Shout out to Water, Needed to Live. Here, let me let's load this up. right, y'all. Let's get back to it, baby. So in the 70s, before the hippies were dismantled with the use of CIA intelligence and Charles Manson and mind control, drug using LSD and shit like that. Which LSD gets a bad rap because of that. I'm not saying everybody should do it. It's not for everybody, but I've tried it and it's not. I've tried also psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, which is similar to LSD, and it's not what the media makes it all out to be. So let's see, more voters than ever before refused to identify themselves as either Democrats or Republicans, and this is the 70s. Back in 1940, 20% of those polled called themselves independents. In 1974, 34% called themselves independent. Shit, I wonder what it is today in 2020. It's probably like 8% of independents. So Watergate, which led to the historic resignation from the presidency, the first in American history, of Richard Nixon in August 1974. Okay, so he hadn't been resigned yet in June whenever this happened in Timeless. It began during the presidential campaign in June of 72. When 5 burglars carrying wiretapping, so this was actually happening in the show. It was supposedly, it was the female there, and she left Rittenhouse. But in reality, according to history, this is what happened. Watergate, which led, I already said that. 5 burglars carrying wiretapping and photo equipment were caught in the act of breaking into the offices of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, in the Watergate apartment complex of D.C. One of the 5, James McCord Jr., worked for the Nixon campaign. He was security officer for the Committee to Re-elect the President. So committee, C, to re-elect, R, R-E, the president. So anyway, that shit was called CREEP. Committee to Re-elect the President is called CREEP. That's the name of that organization. Or that campaign. Or that committee was just called CREEP. That's weird. Both McCord and Hunt, this is another dude, had worked for many years for the CIA. Hunt had been the CIA man in charge of the invasion of Cuba in '61. And 3 of the Watergate burglars were veterans of the invasion. McCord, as CREEP security man, worked for the chief of CREEP, John Mitchell, the Attorney General of the United States. Thus, due to unforeseen arrest by police unaware of the high-level connections of the burglars, information was out to the public before anyone could stop it, linking the burglars to important officials in Nixon's campaign committee, to the CIA, and to Nixon's Attorney General. Wow. In a press conference 5 days after the event, said the White House has no involvement whatsoever in this particular incident. One after another, lesser officials of the Nixon administration, fearing prosecution, began to talk. Finally, Richard Nixon himself, in not only the Watergate burglars, but a whole series of illegal actions against political opponents and anti-war activists. After he was implicated in judicial proceedings, Nixon, in the burglaries of Watergate, but also other illegal actions against political opponents and anti-war activists. Nixon and his aides lied again and again as they tried to cover up their involvement. And I'm going to read a few other things. These came out in the various testimonies. Attorney General John Mitchell controlled a secret fund of $350,000 to $700,000 to be used against the Democratic Party for forging letters, leaking false news items to the press, stealing campaign files. Now that's interesting. Because recently we found out in the news that supposedly that there's this new thing called Obamagate, that the DNC was spying on the RNC during the 26. Wow, why would it be the 2016 one? Or maybe, yeah, I don't know. Supposedly the DNC was spying on the RNC recently, so it's like the opposite happened. But it's not in the news like this was, because it didn't happen in the same way. This got out before. I don't think they would let that happen again. So it says the Gulf Oil Corporation, ITT, which is International Telephone and Telegraph, American Airlines, other huge American corporations had made illegal contributions running into millions of dollars to the Nixon campaign. This all came out during the testimonies. In September 71, shortly after the New York Times printed Daniel Esper's copies of the top secret Pentagon Papers, the burglary of the officers looking for. That just admitted more. So Nixon secretly pledged to give them executive clemency if they were imprisoned. Nixon's nominee for head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, had recently died. L. Patrick Gray revealed that he had turned over the FBI records on its investigation of the Watergate burglary to Nixon's legal assistant John Dean and their Attorney General Richard Kleindienst. Mitchell had just resigned, saying he wanted to pursue his private life, had ordered him not to discuss Watergate with the Secret Judiciary Committee. It turned out certain materials had disappeared from FBI files. Material from a series of illegal wiretaps ordered by Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was he was in charge of our, international affairs, I believe. And he's kind of shady if you look into him. Almost by accident, let's see. Nixon's wish at the CIA was that the CIA tell the FBI not to pursue its investigation beyond the Watergate burglary. So Nixon, because the CIA has been kind of proven to be basically used by the cabal, the 13 families. So Nixon, who in the show he's afraid of Rittenhouse, which is like the Rothschilds, so in reality he's kind of afraid of the Rothschilds, was hoping that the Rothschilds told the FBI to get off his ass and just worry about the burglary and that's it. Almost by accident, a witness told the Senate committee that President Nixon had tapes of all personal conversations and phone conversations at the White House. Nixon at first refused to turn over the tapes, and when he finally did, they had been tampered with. And like I said earlier, 18 and a half minutes of one tape had been erased. In history, they never found out what was on. We never found out what was on those 18 minutes. The theory on this show is that he was talking about how the Illuminati was gonna fuck him up. Interesting. So it also disclosed that for over a year, in 1969, shout out to my mom, that's the year she was born, to 1970, the U.S. had engaged in a secret, massive bombing of Cambodia. Poor guys and gals in Cambodia and children, which it kept from the American public and even from Congress. Man. Yes. So, Nixon was fucking money up. In a quote from a magazine, I believe, some quote says, right now, 90% of Wall Street would cheer if Nixon resigned. This was in 72. This is who said it, a vice president of Merrill Lynch Government Securities. When he did, there was relief in all sectors of the capital E establishment. It was noted that Nixon's Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, he was the Secretary of State, would remain at his post. In other words, that Nixon's foreign policy would continue. That is to say, Julian wrote that Washington will continue to support General Pinochet in Chile, General Geisel in Brazil, General Stroessner in Paraguay, etc., etc., etc. And I don't know what was going on in those places, but I'm assuming it was genocide or something of the sort. Months after Julian wrote this, it was disclosed that the top Democratic and Republican leaders in the House of Representatives have given secret assurance to Nixon that if this is the Democrats and the Republicans gave Nixon secret assurance that if he resigned, they would not support criminal proceedings against him. Sorry, it's so hard to get out. Goodness. Wings of the same bird, people. We all had been shuddering about 2 weeks of televised floor debates on what an impeachment would do, how it would tear the country apart and affect foreign policy. The New York Times articles that reported on Wall Street's hope for Nixon's resignation quoted one Wall Street financier saying that if Nixon resigns, what we will have is the same play with different players. And I boxed this out. We're almost done, guys, with this right here, I believe. Yeah, I'm going to wrap this part up, and we're going to get into the crystal of the week, which is Lapis Lazuli. And it's a special one, y'all. In the charges brought by the House Committee on Impeachment against Nixon, it seemed clear that the committee did not want to emphasize those elements in his behavior which were found in other presidents and which might be repeated in the future. It stayed clear of Nixon's dealings with powerful corporations. It did not mention the bombing of Cambodia and concentrated on things peculiar to Nixon, not on fundamental policies continuous among American presidents at home and abroad. What a great book. Indeed, the barrel was saved. Nixon's foreign policy remained. The government's connections to corporate interests remained. Ford's closest friends in Washington were corporate lobbyists. Alexander Haig, who had been one of Nixon's closest advisors, who had helped him processing the tapes before turning them over to the public, and who gave the public misinformation about the tapes, was appointed by President Ford to be head of the Armed Forces of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. One of Ford's first acts was to pardon Nixon, thus saving him from possible criminal proceedings and allowing him to retire with a huge pension in California. The televised Senate committee hearings on Watergate stopped suddenly before the subject of corporate connections were reached. Dirty tricks against the socialist worker parties, the Black Panthers, other radical groups had to be searched for in a few newspapers. The whole nation heard the details of the quick break-in at Watergate apartment, but there was never a similar television hearing on the long-term break-in to Vietnam. Many of these corporations gave money to both sides, so that whichever one they would have friends in the administration. Chrysler Corporation urged its executives to support the party and candidate of their choice, and then collected the checks from them and delivered the checks to Republican or Democratic campaign committees. ITT in 1960 had made illegal contributions to Bobby Baker, who worked with Democratic senators, including Lyndon Johnson. Shout out to 635. They have to set it up as butter to both sides, so we'll be in a good position whoever wins. In 1970, an ITT director, John McCone, who also had been head of the CIA, told Henry Kissinger, Secretary of the State, and Richard Helms, CIA director, that ITT was willing to give $1 million to help the U.S. government in plans to overthrow the Allende government in Chile. What the fuck do they care about Chile, bro? Wow. In 1971, ITT planned to take over the $1.5 billion Hartford Fire Insurance Company, the largest merger in history of corporate history. It violated antitrust laws, but out of court, in a secret arrangement, ITT agreed to donate $400,000 to the Republican Party. So to be cool with one party, they just donated to another party, and everybody was cool. It would cause hardship for ITT stockholders. McLaren agreed. He was later appointed a federal judge. Wow. This is about milk, y'all. One of the items not mentioned in the impeachment charges and never televised in the Senate hearings was the way the government cooperated with the milk industry. In early 1971, the Secretary of Agriculture announced the government would not increase its price supports for milk, the regular subsidy to the big milk producers. Then the Associated Milk Producers began giving money to the Nixon campaign, met in the White House with Nixon and the Secretary of Agriculture, gave more money, and the Secretary announced that new analysis made it necessary to raise milk price supports from $4.66 to $4.93 a hundredweight. More contributions were made until the total exceeded $400,000. The price increases added $500 million to the profits of dairy farmers, mostly big corporations, at the expense of the consumers. Whether Nixon or Ford or any Republican or Democrat was president, the system would work pretty much the same way. A Senate subcommittee investigating multinational corporations revealed a document, given passing mention in a few newspapers, in which oil company economists discussed holding back production of oil to keep prices up. Aramco, which is the Arabian American Oil Corporation, 75% of whose stock was held by American oil companies and 25% by Saudi Arabia, had made $1 profit on a barrel of oil in 73. In 74, it was making $4.50. None of this would be affected by who was president. The corporations got off easy. American Airlines, which admitted making illegal contributions to the Nixon campaign, was fined $5,000. Goodyear was fined $5,000. 3M Corporation was fined $3,000. A Goodyear official was fined $1,000. The 3M official fined $500. So they donated millions. They had to pay a couple thousand in fines. Because they made millions. With Gerald Ford in office, the long continuity in American policy was maintained. He continued Nixon's policy of aid to the Saigon regime, apparently still hoping that the Dow government would remain stable. So this is about Vietnam. The South Vietnamese army shows every sign of being an effective and spirited security force. Oil exploration will begin very soon. Tourism can be encouraged by continued security of scenic and historic areas and by the erection of a new Hyatt hotel. South Vietnam needs foreign investment to finance these and other developments. She has such a large pool of talented, industrious people whose cost of labor is far less than Hong Kong, Singapore, or even Korea or Taiwan. Wow, this is an excerpt from I don't know what. Somebody from Nixon's office. In March 1975, a Catholic organization making a survey of American attitudes on abortion learned other things. So the statement, the people running the country, government, political, church, and civic leaders don't tell us the truth. More than 83% agreed in 1975. Can you imagine what that number is now in 2020? It's got to be like 90-something%. That's crazy. The problem, it's not crazy. It's good that we don't believe because they've been lying. But 80%, more than 80% in 1975 didn't believe that the church, that the government, and other people, leaders, were honest. Man. Somebody says something interesting. It says the problem, according to Sulzberger, was not the United States behavior, but the way the behavior was presented to the world. Interesting. Alright, so not everything's all doom and gloom, okay? A lot of pedophiles been caught. A lot of people had to take a break from life and had to appreciate family. Lapis Lazuli, right? And they say it's really good if you put it right here. It's for your throat chakra, but it also helps with your third eye. So, Lapis Lazuli. And shout out to Minecraft, because that's the first time I heard about Lapis. Excellent for executives, journalists, and psychologists. It's stimulating wisdom and good judgment in the practical world. It aids in intellectual analysis and archaeologists and historians, problem solving for lawyers, and creates new ideas for inventors and writers. A powerful crystal for activating the higher mind and enhancing intellectual ability. Stimulates desire for knowledge, truth, and understanding. Aids in learning. Helps enhance memory. Man, I feel the power just holding this right here, man. Encourages an honest spirit in spoken and written words. Brings harmony in relationships. It helps, you can't just rely everything on the crystal. You also have to do your work. But along with that, it helps. Along with prayer, positive energy, positive thinking. Positive eating, positive thinking, getting some sunlight. It attracts success and lasting recognition in your field. It activates the third eye and balances energy of your throat chakra. Yes, I do indeed love it. And it's a nice blue. And it's a good one for everybody. I mean, as you heard, it's for executives, it's for writers, it's for lawyers. So any kind of thinking, anything you do. I also read that it can help with children with autism and ADD. So I imagine, if I ever become an actual teacher, I want to get a decent sized lapis for my classroom. I don't know how to put it in a safe area, but it's get it for your kids, whether or not they have, and if they do, that's cool. I mean, I work with autistic kids in my job, and they're very intelligent kids, and I mean, Lapis can help everybody. So thank y'all for tuning in to another episode of the Friday Podcast. Next episode is number 20. And that'll be a special episode for sure. I guess they don't believe in any kind of magic or anything, but there's a lot more to the universe than any of us can imagine. And who knows, we're all guessing, right? But yeah, we all have a lot more in common than people think. From atheists to Christians, from Catholics to Baptists to Republicans to Democrats to Libertarians to whatever. We all would die for our children, the majority of us. 97 at least % of us would run into a building and save our kids, a burning building and save our children. Most of us are good people, and that's just a fact. And with that, I have to walk over there, turn off the camera because I'm by myself. But one love, baby. You.